The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the Hot Grill Summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
Tēnā koutou katoa, my name is Toby Manhire. This has gone by lunchtime. It's just after 1 p.m. on Monday, February the 20th. Kia ora, Annabelle Mather, who's here in the studio with me.
Kia ora.
And thanks to Te Ahi Butler, who's making it all happen here for us. We were going to gather last Tuesday, and we had a agenda ready to go on the policy reprioritisation, all that sort of stuff, which seems now a million years ago, but we couldn't make it happen because I just checked the messages, Ben Thomas, who's piping into us now, and the last message we got from you for several days was, yes, don't worry, can Zoom in no trouble from Wairoa. They have great internet there, and it's free by the river, which has a kind of tragic irony to it now. Tell us about what happened after we got that last message from you. Well, first of all, how are you?
I'm good. Yep. So I was down in Wairoa working remotely last week, and so obviously the sort of cyclone. For some reason, I sort of thought, oh, this will be quite lucky. I'll avoid the depredations of the gigantic cyclone that's heading towards Auckland and Coromandel, according to news reports, and. The night of the cyclone, we sort of went for a drive and kind of had a look at the wild weather. The next morning, I woke up and it was extremely sunny. It was a beautiful day, and I thought, wow, it's a real miracle that we had that terrible weather last night, and now it's all finished. And then I looked a little further out the window underneath the blue skies and saw that the river across from which I'm staying had probably risen, hard to tell, probably at 4 or 5 meters, had totally overflowed the banks, submerged the camper van park opposite, and had cut off the sort of road where I was staying. That was sort of impassable because of the water. And sort of, later that day we were kind of evacuated rather than sort of going through the sort of sludge and mud that had all been thrown up by the river, which was still really kind of torrenting down. You'd see these sort of bales of wool and hay, it's hay bales from upstream, pretty much full trees kind of coming down. Not sure whether that was sort of forestry / or just sort of erosion from the sides of the banks. Really going a pretty fair clip. So we drove through a very helpful neighbour's lawn, into an adjoining road. Went and had a look at the sort of the evacuation centre, how things were around town. It seemed that if you've ever been to Wairoa, the main street, Marine Parade, which is the sort of the commercial district of this bustling town of 5,000 people or so, it's opposite the river, and the floodwaters were sort of, they were encroaching up the bank. They were pretty much onto the street, but they hadn't kind of breached the curvature of the road to get over to where all the shops were. So at that point, we sort of thought things were, it obviously wasn't sort of, great. It wasn't a great situation, but it was, the town had avoided sort of the worst kind of impacts of the cyclone. And it was only sort of that the bridge was closed off because of all of the trees hitting it. That's a new bridge that was built after Cyclone Bowler, which destroyed the previous bridge. So this is a bigger bridge over the Wairoa River in town. That was blocked off by a fire engine to stop people going over, and apparently that was because of all the logs hitting and knocking the bridge, which led to sort of fears that it might kind of collapse. So it was only sort of probably later that day or the next day that people became sort of aware that actually the other side of the river had been absolutely devastated, which is that's a place where there's a sort of confluence of two of the rivers coming from higher ground. And they come together, and what had happened is that they had flooded from both sides and sort of just washed, huge levels. I was talking to a friend of mine from Lake Waikaremoana, who is now working as, on the roading contractor team down here, and he said that they had been dispatched on the night of the cyclone to get people out of their houses on that other side of the river. He said within 10 minutes of going into one house, the mud was up to their waists as they were sort of helping people out. So there are whole sort of streets. I'm not sure how much of the town as a percentage it would be, probably about 15-20% that's just sort of, that was just totally washed over in the sort of silt and sludge. A lot of the houses have been sort of rendered unlivable. If you're familiar with Wairoa again, you'll know that a lot of people in this town, in this district, aren't exactly sort of living like kings and queens anyway. There's been a long-standing housing shortage in the district. Prior to last week, I think there was 0 properties for rent for accommodation in the district. It's sort of a few hundred homes short in terms of the current population, and that was before all of these houses got written off. The power was out for most of the town for only sort of a day or two, but there was this kind of communications. I still don't think we've got fibre internet here, but both the cell networks seem to be back up and running, thanks to Elon Musk, and so sort of contact with the outside world was sort of re-established sort of Thursday, Friday. And there's a variety of sort of relief efforts going on in town. Everyone's sort of, the iwi groups here, Kānunu, Pahuera, then Tūhoi up at the lake and around sort of Tuai. They're all providing support for the district. The city council is sort of mobilised as well as it could. There's a lot of military in town, just doing sort of civil works, digging. Because when you think about how isolated these communities are, during a disaster like this, but also in a way it's a very different experience, from living in the cities or other parts of the country. Cyclone Bowler, which happened when I was probably about 10 or something, I haven't heard about it since the late 80s, except when I'm in Wairoa or the East Coast, where it's still a very real kind of marker of time and milestone because of the devastation that sort of happened, which required sort of permanent changes to the infrastructure and sort of how the town ran.
And the irony is that we've heard so much about the carnage caused by forestry slash over the last couple of weeks, and actually forestry was an industry that was embraced on the East Coast after Bowler because there'd been such terrible erosion from the land being cleared for farming. It was thought of as a way where you could actually strengthen the whenua and start to prevent that erosion, and it's obviously had such a destructive outcome.
What's the scene at the evacuation centre? You said you'd been down there.
Yeah, so there weren't too many people there that first night. Because it's a small town, most people's first port of call will be to go and stay with whānau, and most people, at least temporarily, seem to be able to call on that. So the number of people actually sort of sleeping in the evacuation centres is not huge. You're just talking about sort of more overcrowding, more strain on sort of accommodation. that's sort of the organising point for food aid, and there's obviously a lot of donations coming in, blankets, linen, that kind of thing. More recently, there's been a lot more activity sort of around that area because that was where the first Vodafone receptor was set up on Thursday, and at that point, sort of, I remember a lot of comment around sort of COVID, which was that all of these sort of roads and things have become livable public spaces that were sort of bustling with activity. And I think, most small towns would probably appreciate the level of activity that Wairoa currently has in its sort of central couple of blocks where cell phone activity, reception's been restored. There's been a wide variety of groups who've sort of who've been giving out aid, and a lot of it's sort of focused there. One issue has been that that's actually the wrong side of town. So while all of this sort of assistance is available there, and these people coming in and cooking barbecues and things like that, there's been a few qualms that it sort of hasn't reached the people who are busy digging out their houses and actually dealing with the worst consequences of the disaster so far.
And what is that into that worst affected area on that side of the river? Is that what sort of proportion of the Wairoa population are we talking about there?
That'd be hard to say. Look, it's not the majority, but it's a pretty significant part. Not totally clear. So, but it's in the hundreds, and and it really is sort of complete. Right now the first step in the cleanup was people getting their household goods out onto the roadside to be collected by council. So you just go past, and pretty much everything that families own is sort of just piled high, covered in mud, sort of on the side of the road. And they've started bringing along rubbish trucks to just sort of clear everything away. A lot of cars got ridden off, sort of just stuck on the side of the road because it just rose so quickly, sort of in the middle of the night. A few infrastructure sort of issues. One of the big contracting firms here didn't move the equipment from its yard fast enough, so that got kind of inundated as well. And there's been some sort of discussion that may have sort of hampered some of the early efforts too. It's not a great scene. On the other hand, I think there was quite a lot of concern about Wairoa because it was cut off. At the same time, once those images started coming through on the internet, from Hawke's Bay, or from further south Hawke's Bay, the East Valley, Hastings, small mercies, but it seems that as far as I'm aware, there haven't been any deaths in Wairoa. So it's mainly a matter of property damage, which you don't want to underestimate because this is a pretty deprived area already. But fortunately, no loss of life.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the latest toll is 11 people have died as a result of Cyclone Gabrielle. The connectivity issues people have been talking about those a lot. How did you say that? Did I get you right in saying before that the power came on before the sort of cell tower connections did? And how was that period in terms of people communicating with one another within Wairoa even?
Yeah, it's interesting because it is such a small town. So you did have people coming into those areas like the evacuation centre, which was in the War Memorial Hall, and one of the local reporters to me remarked, it would have been a very different, experience of the disaster if there was phone connectivity, because people had to find it, because the only way you could find out what was happening is going and talking to people and asking them, as opposed to just sort of scrolling or going to updates on news websites. People were in the town. It was very busy. It was very active. In terms of the evacuation centre, which you asked about before, not that many people sleeping there, quite a few people getting support there, but even more people just sort of, trying to find out what's happening. And, it's... I think Kieran McNulty, described it as a communications black hole. And it was it is a sort of interesting experience, going back to the transistor radio and kind of listening into, in my case, because it was the only station I could find, Today FM for updates, and and living in a sort of low information environment, and in that environment, sort of rumors kind of will spring to life. So I think it was a couple of days ago, there were people just sort of, a big, quite agitated group just parked outside one of the ATMs. There's two in the main street, which have both been out of commission, obviously because of the internet. And just this sort of group sort of mobbed around it with, a security guard saying, there's no money coming here. It's, there's nothing to wait for, but obviously they had heard something and it had sort of circulated, and they were kind of not going to miss out. So, and then you get the sort of, sort of rumors about, things that could have made the flood worse. And so, the council's been pretty good here. They've been handing out a very old school communications, handing out a 2-page A4 flyer with sort of all the information to hand. People have been asking sort of, all the questions that you would ask, things like when are we going to get fuel? When are more supplies coming in? And the authorities have been very good in terms of sort of, being very clear what they do know and what they don't know. I think yesterday there was no fuel available at petrol stations until yesterday. And there were huge queues. Sort of, I think they started selling gas again at one of the petrol stations, cash only, at 2 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, there was already a sort of 20-car queue for one side, for your petrol valve being on one side, then the same on the other side, sort of snaking around two kind of corners. And I think that queue stayed about the same size, sort of at least 30 cars lined up for the next probably 4 hours.
To your point about rumours spreading, we had thought that the way of getting rid of misinformation would be to just shut down the internet, but it turns out that experiment didn't work.
No, that's right. Although most people were pretty keen to get some 5G back.
Ben, how are the marae faring down there?
I think they're good. But they were unaffected, as far as I can tell. So I think it's Hinemihi Marae, which is in Clyde, North Clyde, down the end of the affected area. That's where the volunteer efforts have been run out of, and they've. I think it's. I can't remember whether it was Kahanunu or Pahuera. They had food supplies helicoptered in, and were giving out whānau food packages. They've obviously been a very important part of the relief effort. I understand that the two marae up in Waikaremoana, Waimako and Te Kuha, are both okay. I think things were okay sort of up at the lake. And they have, I think, two of the marae, Hinemihi and one of the others, the name I can't quite remember, they've been taking in people as one of sort of 3 areas for evacuees around the town, although, like I said, most people are sort of just relying on whānau. And, one consonant with something that I think was, sort of said in some of the stories that are coming out of the Hawke's Bay, of the churches who are mobilising. The churches have also played a big part. Parishes and congregations have been out helping people. You do see the importance of these sorts of institutions, marae, churches, things where people get together just in the normal course of events, and they're sort of ready to kind of help out just sort of almost on a dime. And you see the value of those institutions. One thing that's been remarked on a few times is that no one with patches seems to be out helping helping people they don't know. One of the highest gang populations in the country, as percentage wise, and but yeah, the much vaunted sort of parallel institution to the state hasn't really come to the party so much in the wake of the disaster.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the hot grill summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Ben, you noted it's not the wealthiest part of the country. There'll be a lot of people who aren't insured. There's people who've been displaced from their homes, and many will be in a kind of getting by situation, staying with whānau friends. What's the mood there now? I mean, there's not accommodation to spare, as you noted. This is the town is going to be affected by this for a long time. What's the mood? What are people talking about?
I think it's something in common with a lot of, the sort of the natural sort of trajectory of these things, which is that in the first few days, everyone is, sort of just glad that there was no loss of life, that they got out, that their family was safe. Towards the end of, the power was back on. There wasn't too much disruption with the water supply for most of the town, and that kind of. As the reality sort of or the other sort of reality starts to set in, which is, the cleanup effort that's required, which is, it's still pretty, it's still pretty massive on the other side of the river. As you noted, I heard one estimate which was 30% of people didn't have insurance. Wairoa is a town that, a long time ago, many decades ago, was a very prosperous little town. And there are some sort of, older people who will own their own homes but just don't have insurance on the homes. A lot of people don't have insurance for their contents and their goods. And that's all gone in those areas. So, there is that sort of sense of frustration. There's been, looting, apparently happening in that area, and that gives rise to a sort of sense of frustration as well. I think spirits are pretty high. It is a very tight-knit and supportive community here. But, I think the scale is starting to become apparent. The idea that, people are waiting for, the countdown to be restocked, the new world to be restocked. There's been discussion that the only way to get fuel through will be through State Highway 38 through to Urewera. Now, I don't know if you've ever driven that road, but I can't really imagine it's easy to sort of maneuver a sort of Mad Max Fury Road sort of style fuel tanker through there. And you do realize, the kind of precariousness, of these towns, and it brings up a lot of issues like, their rail link stopped years ago, and I think it's hard for people in this sort of community to sort of feel like they have, even if they're sort of spoken of as a priority now, it's very hard for them to feel that they've always been front of mind, I guess.
Just to your point about looting, Ben, I was listening to an interview with Andrew Costa this morning, who actually said that there's less looting, less dishonesty crime happening at the moment than usual, but what has increased is family violence call-outs.
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd expect that there's less dishonesty offences because, you're probably not having a lot of shoplifting going on because none of the shops are open. And I think the other thing is that, because the connectivity is still not great, there's no way of telling the police that these things are happening, right? And so, I mean, look, it's probably right. You would probably expect that there's a lower level of it. But I think, it's certainly disheartening for people when it happens.
Ben, did you get an alert? Did you get a civil defence alert?
No.
No. And I mean, it's one of the, obviously there's a lot of different layers of things to be reviewed, but I'm not sure whether everyone in that part of the world got those alerts work properly. Have you heard anything more on that?
No, not at all. No, I didn't. A kindly elderly civil defence volunteer let me hotspot off her phone on Friday, which was my first sort of, connectivity. Then Sparks Network came back online sort of yesterday, but no kind of word on what was happening with civil defence alerts or anything. I just don't think they came through here.
Annabelle, tomorrow the Parliament, which adjourned after a kind of brief sitting last week, sits properly. There'll be the Prime Minister's statement and then responses from the leaders of the other parties. It feels like a world away from what we were anticipating just over a month ago when we were looking forward to Jacinda Ardern versus Christopher Luxon's setup. It's sort of hard to fathom really where we are now, delayed and changed personnel. This issue, what's happened with Cyclone Gabrielle, the readiness for it, all of that is going to absorb everything, isn't it?
It is, and I think the government are probably going to have a bit of a rethink of some of the other policies that they were trying to usher through, not just Three Waters, but the changes to the Resource Management Act, which was supposed to make things, what was it, quicker, faster, harder, stronger, smarter,
Daft
better.
Punk something, yeah.
Because I think what this shows is that our town planning has failed us in the regions, and not too long ago the government was looking at building, housing on what had been identified as a floodplain in Rotorua. So I think, if anything, we're going to have to take a more careful approach with the RMA to mitigate, what's happened and to ensure that we don't create situations where there's more of this in the future.
What have you been thinking, Ben? You've had plenty of time to reflect, and in many ways you've been sort of in the midst of it. What are your sort of big thoughts on what happens next in terms of New Zealand's political policy response?
Yeah, I think I heard, I was walking past sort of two old guys kind of having a yarn, and one of them said to the other one, "Nowhere's safe anymore." The other one said, "No, nowhere's safe." And I'm not sure to what extent the rest of New Zealand is feeling like that. I presume people in Auckland are after the latest sort of after the latest battering. Presumably people in Christchurch always sort of think that. But I think Luke Malpas, I think it was on RNZ, said that for a long time climate adaptation has been a sort of poor cousin to climate change mitigation, emissions reduction policy. And it's unlike the reductions policy, it's not actually one that we can continue kicking down the road, because whatever you do at this point is part of your climate change adaptation policy. If you decide to do nothing, that's your policy now. And it strikes me as sort of I haven't totally caught up with the discourse. I saw that Houdin was talking about an early election, and
I think he's pretty well alone in that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was thinking through the strategy. I mean, obviously to be sort of advantageous for Labour, but because the argument would go something like this, and this is what I was sort of thinking through, is that, you know, you would say, look, it's pretty clear that, you know, there's been massive underinvestment in infrastructure over many years for problems that we'd never really sort of expected to kind of come, you know, either this soon or this ferociously. You know, we need to do a massive rebuild, a massive, you know, and we want a mandate from the electorate to get right on with it, you know, and I think this will, you know, we were heading towards a sort of nothing election, right, where it was, you know, the battle of two people who weren't Jacinda Ardern to convince us that they were the least like Jacinda Ardern and the most like doing nothing else, you know. And
to make themselves as small as possible, like killed into tiny little pebbles on the stage.
And now, you know, I think there will be a demand for, you know, even if not immediate action, like at least a sort of stance on where you sit, in terms of, or a stance on where you stand, I guess would be more grammatically correct, like syntactically or whatever. Yeah, I think both of the parties will have to be sort of looking at something, you know, kind of going a bit beyond the sort of political whiteboarding of, you know, what kind of subsidy will get us which chunk of votes in the election in October, and into, oh shit, now we've got a real issue that we actually need to deal with in a serious way, which is, you know, restoring, hopefully, if you can, ensuring the resilience of sort of, you know, provincial communities, you know, because it's, you know, it is sort of strange to think of, you know, these communities like Gisborne. You know, Gisborne's a city, and it's, you know, it's right now totally cut off, apart from, you know, two highways that are both, you know, riddled with slips and craters, and, you know, yeah, and so, you know, you can talk about building back better, but, you know, it could be. I was reading a book about the, you know, the teal revolution in Australia, and how that was sort of you know, the teal candidates were kind of galvanized by the bushfires, you know, and I think we've talked earlier about why I think there's a difference between the National Party here and the Libs and National in Australia, in terms of, you know, where they are on climate policy. But I think it will require both of the parties to sort of, you know, have something worthwhile to say. And, you know, that for both parties, that'll require, you know, some pretty serious work that isn't just sort of on the political basis.
Well, I see the logic of why if you were Labour, why you might be tempted to call an early election now, because I think crises, obviously great for governments, you know, all of that stuff. But then about 6 months down the road, when the road still hasn't been fixed and your paddock's still got silt and crap all over it, then people start to get fired up, the media gets fired up, and then the difficult questions start coming. So I see why you might want to do it now, but I think that most New Zealanders would see it as being quite a self-serving proposition when you really need people making hard decisions quickly, rather than out campaigning and kissing your babies.
Can't get across the bridge to the polling booth, whether or not that's the right time for election. Ben, critically, what have you been doing with your time when you weren't able to access Twitter or other websites? Have you read lots of books?
No, just sort of just kind of walking around, driving around, having a look, accompanying some of the Doughty local reporters on their work, and being just as useless to them as I am to the wider community.
All right, look, we're gonna call time on it now. Ben's got stuff he has to do. We'll return to the usual, as per political claptrap next week, maybe. We still haven't even talked about the merger and all those sorts of things. We're a little bit out of key. Thanks, Ben, for coming in. We have been thinking about you, missing you. It's good to see that you're all in one piece.
Okay, here's my tip for the merger.
No, don't worry. Okay, go on.
My tip for the merger, the future is AM. The future is low frequency. low frequency, maybe just emergency
the wind-up ones.
Maybe that's it.
I think we were talking this morning, the new spin-off members merch has got to be a wind-up torch AM radio, right? That's the future.
Love that.
Ideally with a kind of emergency flare strapped to it as well.
And
just
a bottle
case.
opener.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, spin-off members, for making this possible. Thanks, Tiahia. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Annabelle. See you next time. Kia ora.
And just a big shout out to all the people doing amazing work in Wairoa and the surrounding Hawke's Bay.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the Pōtiki of the Taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama for Ko Papa Ko Rangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato o Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.